I tried to shoosh them away. They completely ignored me, showing no fear and continued to try to come inside. Wow! Exclamation mark! What an experience! Exclamation! What do you all think? In harmony, and then she gives her name, and that's on our website. Now, you know, when that first came in, um, yeah, it was. It wasn't something that I had really fully anticipated or expected,
Mm.
and 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 over the course of time, we had more reports like that come in. Like there was one of our members was a day trader, financial day trader, and he'd been playing some tracks related to like just kind of like a positive mental financial state type thing, and he'd had his window open, and he hadn't seen a lot of birds in his neighborhood the last for I guess a month or so, and there was a very large tree in front of his house, and I think I can't remember if he said he had left the house or if he had simply looked outside. I think he said he
Mhm.
was getting ready to leave the front door, and as he left the house, he happened to look up in this very large tree, and from what I remember, he said he saw thousands and thousands of bohemian waxwings sitting. He said you almost never see them in the neighborhood. They were just sitting there, and he said that they were watching him, and he said that they must have appeared there apparently shortly after he began to play these tracks. So
Wow.
this has become somewhat of a common experience, and there's been a number of other sort of strange accounts with cats and dogs, and I think some horses and some wild animals. There's two things. Some friends of mine from Victoria had gone out to a forest in their car,
Mhm.
and it was midday, and it was nice out, nice blue sky summer day, and it was a very thick forest, and they had gone into, from what I remember, it was somewhat of a small field surrounded by a canopy of trees, and they began to just play some tracks just for a kick to see what would happen. And they didn't. I'm sure they didn't expect anything to happen. And so they were lying on the hood of the car, and I think they said that after about 10 to 20 minutes, they began to get what they said was it was almost a creepy feeling. It wasn't a bad feeling. They said that I think they said that it was somewhat positive, but it also felt a bit creepy.
Mm.
And it was as though they said that it was the sensation that they had. They claimed was that it was as though the forest had become much more aware generally, and also much more aware of them in particular. And it felt like the forest was watching them, and they described a few other kinds of strange things. And then another event was this last year. I There's a place that's roughly about an hour and a half away from where I live, and it's a decent sized lake, and it's somewhat isolated. There's not a lot of people in the area. There's a few little houses around the perimeter of it, and I'd gone there uh, with my lady friends and her buddy, and it was very late at night, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and very isolated, very quiet, um, and they had a couple of like cigarettes that they were smoking, and I brought some little portable speakers with me, and we were going to just play these tracks into the darkness of this lake to see what would happen, and so we were on the edge of the shore. It was nice out, it was a very dark sky, a lot of stars, and almost a mildly ominous feeling because you're so far in the middle of nowhere, really, outside of the city. This is the feeling that we had,
Mm.
and the area that we were in was very marshy, so there was a lot of cattails and a lot of if you were to go right to the water, you would see that the area that we were in, the shallow water would have extended, I'm guessing, maybe about 50 feet or so, and all of that 50 feet was just covered
Mm.
with large cattails.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
we were kind of sitting back and laughing and talking, and we were just playing it. And I think after about, and it was very quiet. when we had arrived there.
Mhm.
Uh, and about 20 minutes after, and we had very cheap speakers. They were, it was not, yeah, you know, because they were just
They
like
were,
little,
yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah, and you know,
yeah.
just little portable ones. We plugged it into a iPod or a notebook or something. So the volume couldn't have been like super loud. It was loud enough that you could hear it. And after about 20 minutes, we noticed that there was a whole lot of other sounds going on in the background.
Mm.
And at first, I think we weren't really fully aware of it until it was just we realized, like, wow, what is going on? Like, what is that? So we turned the sound off and we realized that all of these birds must have woken up, and there was quite the orchestra of different sounds, and it was like they were calling to a lot of a lot of birds singing to each other quite a bit. And when we turned the sound off, about another 10 minutes passed, and that sort of faded out. So we did it a couple of times, and after,
So wait, it's still kind of resonated after you turn it off.
well, what we would
If you,
do is, yeah, I mean, when we would turn the frequencies off, the background sound of the birds would it would subside, from what I recall, maybe about 8 minutes, and then they'd go quiet again. So I mean, I'm guessing we were probably waking them up, you know. But the nature of the
mm,
sounds are such that they travel quite a bit, and they're very different. So you know, and we were kind of feeling bad, like, well, you know, we don't want to, you know, wake the birds up too
is
much,
that,
but
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But we were still tempted to just see what would happen, and we tried it a few times, and then we heard something very peculiar off in the distance, and it was like a loud splash, like there was a large body in the water that had been jumping around, and it sounded like it could have been like man-sized, you know, or just big. Now in
Mm.
this area of Canada, uh, I don't know what that would have been. It might have been maybe it was a dog that was out in the middle or out in the lake doing something, or maybe it was a beaver, uh, maybe it was a deer. We don't know, but it had a very strange movement pattern, because what would happen is when we began to really notice it, it would make one very loud splashing sound, and then it would stop, and some time would pass, and then it would be closer, and it would make another splashing, and it was clearly coming towards us, and it was clearly coming towards the sound.
Oh no.
Sure, and so we're feeling a little bit spooked out, because
Yeah.
you know it's pretty dark. You really can't see what's out there, and you know we would turn the frequencies on, and then we would turn them off, and so the impression we got was that whatever this thing was, it was big, and it was curious, and it was coming towards us. And so at some point it was quite close, and we decided to just get in the car and go. So as
Yeah.
far as yeah, as far as the response from animal life goes, this seems to be the case.
Well, to me it makes a lot of sense, especially since your technology is based on the frequencies that stars make, and then if you go into astrological science, they talk about like how the celestial bodies have effect on our emotions and our consciousness. So, and animals are definitely more in tune than human beings are. So why wouldn't it have an effect on them as well, you know?
Sure.
I mean that's what I'm thinking. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on stars and the connection that human beings have to the universe, and the fact that people in big cities can't really see stars, right? You can't really see stars unless you go out of the city where it's not lit. And I was just wondering, do you think that can have an effect on our consciousness? The fact that we're kind of disconnected, living in, not saying technologies and living in a big city is bad, but you know,
It's a good question, and I think it's tied into a number of different areas. You know, not least of which is the very long-standing uh, kind of contest that goes on between you know, traditional astrologers and contemporary scientists, and you know, certainly there's a conversational thread there, you know, to unravel. I don't personally take the stance of a traditional astrologer. I do believe that stellar bodies exert a definable and specific set of effects on organisms, and I think that to a degree there is languaging that exists in astrology that can be somewhat descriptive of that process. But I also think that there is a lot of things going on that is not necessarily well described by astrology. It's an attempt to describe certain mechanics. I also think that in not all, but much of the conventional sciences, there is a myopia that exists that is dismissive of phenomena that, and phenomena that's provable, phenomena that is that has been, that has gathered sufficient evidence to look at in a quantifiable and qualifiable way to say there is something going on. So I would probably not be too popular with the hardcore, with some hardcore astrologers, and I probably wouldn't be too popular with some conventional scientists. But to answer your question about, first of all, do I think that stellar bodies, including stars, can have an effect on organisms, on life? Yeah. And I think that there's hard science that proves that's the case. And I think that there's an affectation across multiple vectors, including the blood, the various energetic fields in the body, certainly the nervous system. But then if we take a look at that part of your question that's asking, is the visual acuity, or is the ability to see, say, stars or starlight in a given environment, is that ability to see, or the lack of being able to see, how would that affect us? My answer to that would be that the affecting qualities of stellar bodies, for the most part, would exert an influence regardless of whether one was able to see them visually or not. Within a certain, there was a really interesting study that was done a while ago. There's a few of them actually, and there was a subject that was addressed, and that was that when cosmic particles are entering the atmosphere, to what extent, when they're falling through the atmosphere and they're impacting, say, the soil, or if they're impacting the, like a body of water, to what depth penetration do they exert any kind of an effect, and at what point, is their effect muted? Well, we do know that there are certain kinds of natural barriers that can have a muting, or a neutralizing effect on some cosmic particles. So if you were to ask me, if you had a person that was, say, living in an area that was very naturally beautiful, and there wasn't a lot of atmospheric pollution, and the sky was somewhat easy to view, in contrast to someone living in a very urban, highly populated area with a lot of, dense pollution in the atmosphere, would there be any detectable difference? There probably would be, sure. And there would probably be, because, part of what you're dealing with here is a precipitant. So, you're dealing with an energetic precipitant that is comprising both particulate mass and matter, the cosmic particles, and you're also dealing with different wavelengths. So, there's probably a very good argument to make that you can affect on some level the physiology of an organism from the input information presented to it. So, for example, if visual stimuli is presented to a human being of a certain type and order, etc., yeah, change can be. We know this is true. This is the exposure of to different kinds of colors of light.
Yeah.
So it's actually a very good question that you've asked, and I think that certainly, if nothing else, a person that probably saw starlight on a regular basis, as opposed to someone who didn't, I would say that there's probably a reasonable chance that there would be some degree of psychological